Have you ever known a silence so complete? It feels louder than any explosion? For the men of the 101st Airborne Division entering the Dutch town of Wageningen on May 5, 1945, that silence was their greeting. They were the liberators, the victors, hardened by a trail of fire and blood that stretched from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of the Reich. They expected cheers, flags, the joyful tears of a people set free. Instead, they were met by the dead quiet of a ghost town, and from that quiet, the ghosts emerged. Not with shouts of joy, but with a slow, agonizing shuffle. They were skeletons draped in worn-out clothes. Their faces were hollowed-out masks of suffering, their eyes vast and empty. And then the soldiers saw the children. A little girl, perhaps 7, stood trembling by the road. Her traditional Dutch dress, once a thing of beauty, now hung on her like a shroud. Her legs were brittle sticks. Her face was a haunting portrait of famine, a sight that would be seared into the memories of these soldiers for the rest of their lives. In that moment, they understood. They weren't just liberating a town. They were walking into the aftermath of a massacre, one carried out not with bullets but with bread. This was the final, brutal chapter of the Hunger Winter, the Dutch Hunger Winter. It was not a tragic consequence of war, it was a weapon of war. A calculated, cold-blooded death sentence signed in Berlin and carried out with chilling efficiency. It began in the fall of 1944. As Allied forces pushed across Europe in Operation Market Garden, the Dutch government, in exile, called for a national railway strike to paralyze German logistics. The strike was an act of incredible bravery. The retaliation was an act of incredible cruelty. The German command, furious and vindictive, imposed a total food embargo on the Western Netherlands. They built a wall of steel and starvation around 4.5 million people, cutting them off from all food and fuel, just as the harshest winter in decades descended. It was a simple, horrific equation. No compliance, no food. What followed was a slow, methodical descent into a hell previously unimaginable in a modern European nation. The daily calorie count plummeted to a mere 400–800 calories per person, less than what is needed to sustain life even at complete rest. Families burned their furniture for a flicker of warmth. They stripped wallpaper from the walls to boil for the microscopic amount of potato starch in the glue. Parks and public gardens were dug up, every last root and weed consumed. Pets vanished from the streets. Then came the tulip bulbs. They were poisonous, causing agonizing stomach cramps, but they were something to eat. People would boil them for hours to try and leach out the toxins, their hunger so gnawing it outweighed the fear of poison. For a parent, there is no greater agony than watching your child suffer when you are powerless to help. This was the daily torture for millions. In her diary, a mother from Amsterdam named Anna Vandenberg captured this nightmare in a few heartbreaking words. "Today," she wrote, "my youngest asked for bread. I had none. She cried, then stopped crying because she is too weak to cry for long. She is 7 years old and weighs perhaps 30 pounds. I watch her dying and I can do nothing. I pray to God for food, but God seems as far away as the Americans." That prayer, whispered in the dark and frozen homes across Holland, was about to be answered. First from the sky. In the final, desperate days of April, the Allies launched one of the most unique missions of the entire war. After negotiating a truce with the local German command, British and American bombers, the very same machines that had been instruments of destruction, flew low over the Dutch countryside. But this time, their bomb bays were filled not with explosives, but with life. Operation Manna and Operation Chow Hound dropped thousands of tons of food to the starving population. For the people on the ground, seeing these giant aircraft, not as harbingers of death but as angels of mercy, was a miracle. It was the first glimmer of hope. But the airdrops were a temporary lifeline, not a cure. The true rescue came on the ground. When Staff Sergeant William Cooper saw that little girl, her eyes devoid of light, something inside him, a mechanism hardened by months of combat, simply broke. He reached into his pack, pulled out a simple D-ration chocolate bar, and knelt down. He held it out. The girl didn't move. She stared at the small brown rectangle as if it were an object from another universe. Then in a flash, her tiny hand darted out and snatched it. She didn't eat it. She clutched it to her chest, her whole body shaking with silent, racking sobs. It wasn't just food. It was proof that the world had not forgotten her. It was proof that kindness still existed. Seeing this, a wave of understanding passed through the American soldiers. This was an enemy they could defeat without firing a single shot. An order was given, but it came from the heart, not the rule book. "Break out all the rations," Sergeant Cooper said, his voice thick. "Everything we've got." In that moment, military protocol was abandoned for a higher calling. These were no longer just soldiers. They were fathers, brothers, and sons, and they saw in the faces of these children the faces of their own families back home. The chaos that followed was the most beautiful kind. Packs were torn open, jeep compartments emptied. Men who had been trained to kill now found a deeper meaning in the simple act of giving. They discovered that feeding a single starving child felt more victorious than capturing any enemy stronghold. A soldier from Massachusetts, Private Eugene Henderson, would later write a letter to his family, trying to describe the indescribable. "The children cry when you give them chocolate," he wrote. "Not because they're sad, but because they're so grateful they can't contain the emotion. Yesterday, a little girl gave me a flower she'd picked. It was the only thing she had to give. I cried. I'm not ashamed to admit it. This is why we fought the war, so children like her could have flowers instead of starvation." That single flower, given in exchange for a piece of chocolate, was a transaction not of goods, but of grace. It was the symbol of a bond being forged between two nations, a bond born from the darkest of times. The recovery was long and arduous. Allied medics set up emergency clinics, facing conditions that defied belief. Dr. Henrik Mulder, a Dutch pediatrician, recorded the horrors. Children of 10 with the weight of a 5-year-old, their bodies so ravaged by months of consuming their own muscle and tissue, that for some, even food was no longer enough to save them. But for the vast majority, the intervention came just in time. The soldiers did more than just provide food and medicine. They provided healing. They organized games, taught the children songs, and brought back the sound of laughter to streets that had only known the sound of weeping. They helped rebuild not just the bodies, but the stolen childhoods of an entire generation. This story teaches us a profound lesson. The true measure of victory is not marked by surrendered flags or conquered lands. It is marked by the lives that are saved. The American soldiers in Holland won their most important battle not with guns, but with generosity. They chose humanity over orders, compassion over protocol, and in doing so they left behind a legacy that has outlasted any monument of stone or steel. Those children, the skeletal figures in wooden clogs who stared at chocolate bars as if they were miracles, they lived, they grew up. They raised their own children in peace and prosperity, telling them the story of the tall strangers from across the sea, who arrived like angels when all hope was lost. They became the living, breathing evidence that even in the abyss of war, a single act of kindness can change the world. And that is a victory that will echo for eternity.